Our fifth and final reader won the Crawford Award for his first novel, Pandemonium, and has also written The Devil's Alphabet, Raising Stony Mayhill, Hall, and the story collection Unpossible. His comic works include the ongoing Planet of the Apes series and the recently completed Dracula, the Company of Monsters series, co-written with Kurt Busiek. He lives in State College, Pennsylvania, where he writes programming code in the morning, prose in the afternoons, and comics at night. Please give a warm Tuesday Funk welcome to Daryl Gregory.
What's up, motherfuckers? I'm so happy to be here in Chicago, my hometown. Actually, that's a lie. I tell people Chicago's my hometown until I find out they are from Chicago. And then I have to explain I'm actually from the southwest suburbs. And then I say I'm from Darien, and they give me a blank look. And then I say, you know, it's near Hinsdale. And they say, oh, like the Oasis on 294. And I say, yes, I was raised in that Oasis. I stack the room with friends and family. I'm also sponsored tonight by Bucket of Blood, Books and Records. Fabulous used bookstore, very friendly to science fiction. Owned by the best man at my wedding, Mark Rubelo, one of my best friends in high school. And actually, a huge chunk of our wedding party 25 years ago was here in the room. So including our flower girl, Courtney Summerfield, who is disturbingly old. Yeah, and so...
Ray is dead.
No, she's very young. This story is from one of the original stories from my collection, Unpossible, which is available for purchase here for the round sum of $10, because that's a round sum, and I can do math higher than that. So it's a story about a mother and daughter, but tonight is for a guy in a wedding party who couldn't be here, my brother-in-law, Ken Bishke. I wake up to see my daughter's face. Her lips are pulled back in disgust, an expression of furious condescension that is one of the primary weapons of the American 14-year-old. Her skin is pale in this winter light, washed in the glow of a frost-hazed glass, her brown eyes almost black. Dark hair, the same shade as her father's when I first met him, falls over one cheek. Oh, Franny is so angry. Yet even outraged, worn out from too little sleep, she is beautiful. Her face, frozen in this moment, is the first thing I see when I awake, the last thing I see before I fall asleep, and at every moment in between. The tumor had been growing for some time. The warning signs, the physiological notices advertising the tumor's acquisition of new territory were apparent only in retrospect. A few more headaches than usual, an occasional flutter in the right corner of my vision that I chalked up to too many hours at the computer. There was no reason why this was the moment that my vision froze. It just so happened that on that day, in that second, one more cell divided, one more neuron fired in agitation or failed to fire. And the mental movie, but not a movie, it's more complicated than that, stopped on that final frame. Franny, dark-eyed, shouting. My brain didn't know what to make of this cessation of activity. The retina continued to blast pixels into the visual cortex, but somewhere in the thalamus, that trillion-rail switchyard that routes sensation to the conscious mind, a track had been shut down. And so the thalamus delivered the only freight it had, the identical pattern of impulses it had passed along a moment before. But the mind demanded more. What next? What next? And the thalamus, empty-handed, pushed the pattern again, and kept pushing an infinite string of boxcars bearing that same image, her angry, beautiful face. What I see is not like a photograph or a blurred still from a movie. The world has depth, as shimmering and fully three-dimensional as the world on the other side of anyone's eye. It seems to me not as if the world has stopped, but that I've become stuck in time. I'm staring at Fanny, waiting to rejoin her. I can't remember the exact words she yelled before that moment, or what new syllable was forming on her lips. Something like, "It's my fucking phone." That morning she'd lost her cell again, and for the second time that week we were running late because she spent 10 minutes calling her own number, tossing bedclothes, and checking pockets to no avail, and we got into the car without it, and I made my usual threat to cancel the phone if she couldn't keep track of it. It was a trivial, silly argument. In that moment, I wanted to strangle her, and I'm sure she wanted to do the same to me. But these shouting matches weren't matches at all, merely flare-ups, as dangerous as a single firecracker. My husband never understood how we could be screaming at each other one moment and in the next deciding on lunch, signing a permission slip, kissing goodbye. I told him that Franny could yell at me because she knew she couldn't hurt me. I was her mother, and I could weather her blows. She knew, bone deep, that I wasn't going anywhere. When I awoke in the hospital, Franny was there, scowling in mid-shout. Behind her, the voices of doctors described my condition. The neurologist, my first neurologist, who, like a first boyfriend, was destined to be remembered only vaguely by a set of brief, awkward interactions, explained that when they brought me in, they ordered the MRI because of the threat of concussion and were surprised to see the tumor there. So, in a way, he said, the accident was lucky. Lucky for him, I was too doped on painkillers to respond to the insult and too weak to slap him. The surgery to remove the tumor was a success, or rather, not a total failure. There were depths they feared to excavate, but with radiation and chemotherapy, I had a very good chance of living through the year. As for the persistence of vision, it certainly was persistent. He chuckled at his own joke, but of course, I couldn't see his face. It was unprecedented, really. I didn't care about that. Tell me about my daughter, I said. Tell me about Franny. More doctors arrived. They feared too much emotion would slow my recovery. They proceeded to itemize my other injuries as if my body had not already delivered the news. I could feel the subsonic ache of deep bruises and fractured bones. Every move of my limbs moaned the damage. My constant hallucination was a welcome distraction. I was not only in the hospital, I could look out on that bright winter day, the sun coming through the windshield, shining on the face of my daughter. Each morning I awoke to her angry face, yelling silently at me, "It's my fucking phone." A psychologist suggested, in oblique terms, that perhaps guilt was preventing me from letting go of that moment. But he had his facts wrong. The tumor froze me before the accident. When I turned to look back at the road, my hands on the wheel, I could see nothing but Franny from a few seconds before. I blinked and shouted, not understanding what was happening, and it was as if I'd fallen asleep and could not shake that dream from my head or open my eyes. I mashed the brake in panic. As it turns out, this was the wrong thing to do. The road was icy, the traffic too thick around me. I told the psychologist in non-oblique terms to fuck off. My condition was neurological, and I became a student of how the tumor had sabotaged my vision. What we see when we say we are seeing is not a snapshot of transmitted light, not a slideshow projected on the inside of the skull. The fovea, the most sensitive area of the eye, is only a millimeter in diameter, capable of capturing a cone of light only a few degrees wide. But the eye makes do. It flicks this tiny lens about a dozen times a second, jittery as a robin snatching photons. The image is a composite, a patchwork of these snapshots with the gaps, and there are many gaps, filled in with expectation, embroidered with biases, colored and shaped by experience. Edges and depth and motion are illusions manufactured by specialty neurons. The scene we picture in our heads, this model, is an act of imagination, like summoning a word from a string of characters. Franny, in the moment that I keep with me, is not just a jumble of light in a Franny-like shape. She's everything I know about my daughter, everything I expect to see complete in herself. Not a letter or even a word. She's a poem. There are many old people in this facility. You cannot live very long on this planet without experiencing tragedy. Most have lost spouses. Many have lost children. My own story is nothing notable. But I wonder how many of them can still picture the faces of their loved ones. So many of my fellow residents have minds hollowed by Alzheimer's or rewired by dementia. Or perhaps they've merely forgotten. Age is a sneak thief, an untrustworthy orderly who pockets your spare change. You don't miss it until you go looking for it. The thefts happen every day, day after day. I am lucky. I have lived much longer than the year they gave me. And no matter how old I get, my condition has made it impossible to forget what my daughter looked like at 14, eyes rimmed by too much eyeliner, pale and furious and vibrant. I'm also famous in certain white-coated circles. Neurologists, some of them quite young, come to see me. Very rarely someone proposes a new treatment. I tried many of these in years past, but I'm done with that now. I will not submit to surgery again. I don't want to lose what little I have left. The doctors ask me how I cope. I tell them there was a time, lasting for years, but I do not say that I wish that the tumor had struck me truly blind, or failing that, frozen my vision on something banal. Why couldn't my final sight have been of some boring landscape, or beige ceiling, or the red-black of the inside of my eyelid? Why not something I could ignore? But now I'm content. Every day is a sunny day, I tell them. Every moment is morning. And I have my daughter. She's a middle-aged woman now. Her wheelchair, the latest in a succession of wheelchairs, each more sophisticated than the last, this new one capable of climbing stairs, has been no impediment to her visits or her life. She has 2 grown children. A grandchild, my first great-grandchild, is on the way. Franny comes twice a week, without fail, to sit beside me, her warm hand on mine. I can tell her anything. I can tell her when I'm afraid, or missing her father, or frustrated with the limitations of life in this place. And when I have nothing to say, she says, "Tell me about when I was young." Thanks.